Hello, everybody. I am Drew Duncan. Do not forget that Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram are all at Drew Duncan Radio. Additionally, you can find me on YouTube and Patreon by looking for Drew Duncan Radio. And do not forget that I am wherever you are listening to podcasts. Simply tell your device to play Drew Duncan on iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. I am wherever you are listening to podcasts. Man, I tell you what, NFL memes, I don't know if you guys follow it. I do. I follow NFL memes on Facebook and I think either Twitter or Instagram, one of the two. I know I follow them on two different planes. And regardless, they had actually a really novel idea, right? They put out this thing basically where they said what the XFL should do and the NFL should do is come together, basically creating a joint venture and saying, look, if the championship team in the XFL, right, what they would do is they would get a ride to the NFL, and then the team that is the worst in the NFL would then be forced to go down to the XFL level, and then they would have to play their way back into the NFL by eventually winning a championship in the XFL. Can you imagine the Seattle Dragons or DC Defenders, right, and New York Guardians, Houston Roughnecks back, in the NFL? That would be a hell of a novel idea, because then you would literally have XFL teams competing for a championship and the right for that team, that roster, to go to the NFL, and you would have NFL teams going, well, I want to get demoted, right? That's how it would be looked at. You're calling this a demotion. I don't want to go down there. I don't want to get demoted, bro. I don't want to do that. So I kind of like it. I mean, it's kind of a fantasy thing, because the reality of it is some craziness like that would probably never happen. But I do think that it is great to think about, because when you start thinking about the talent gap, right? So everybody keeps talking about it's a talent gap. Da-da-da-da-da. The XFL just doesn't match up with the NFL. It's just not good enough. Which to me is kind of a farce, to be honest with you. And, my main concern, I don't want to say concern. Look, let's just look at it like this. Let's just keep it 100. And what is this, week 2? This is week 2 in the XFL. Just got done. Okay? You had a couple of games on Saturday that, whatever. And then you had a couple of games that were like, oh, man, these are really great. Let's run a little contrast to comparison. Week 2 in the NFL saw the Buccaneers beat the Panthers. That ended up being a big game in the season, wasn't it? The Ravens beat the Cardinals by 6. Ooh, the Lions over the Chargers by 3. The 49ers waylaid the Bengals 41-17. The Cowboys beat Washington. Seattle over Pittsburgh. Oh, the Bills beat the Giants. The Patriots had a close one with the Dolphins, 43-0. Oh, the Chiefs over the Raiders, 28-10. The Rams-Saints game brought some drama, but the Rams ended up winning that one 27-9. The Bears came back to beat the Broncos. Both of those teams were Super Bowl contenders this season. And the Browns beat the Jets 23-3. That was just a couple of the games. And it wasn't the Browns-Jets game on Monday night, right? That was the marquee game of the week on Monday night. The Browns over the Jets 23-3 in week 2. And yeah, sure, you had that 27-0 blowout in week 2 of the XFL. But you also had that 17-9 game. You had that Roughnecks game that was 28-24. So, sure, 2 games were not very good, but 2 games were also very good. And you have to remember that in a league of 32 versus a league of 8, there's not necessarily a talent gap. I mean, there's going to be, but that's really not what it's about, is it? Because with less games brings about the more possibility that the boring games are going to stand out a lot more. Because it's not as spread out, and because it's new, the fanfare isn't as spread out. And because the fanfare isn't as spread out, when people watch and it gets boring, they turn it off. Well, there's just not another game that they can go ahead and flip to. So I feel like there's a lot of things that we have to take into account with the XFL right now that we're just not willing to do for some odd reason. I don't know if it's because we are too ingrained in the NFL. I don't know if it's because we're ashamed to admit that we like the XFL. I don't know if it's because these rule changes are not something that people can really adjust to because we've become so accustomed to how things work, collegiate versus NFL. We know those rules, and the XFL comes along and says, no, we're going to really try and change the game up a lot here. But I think the XFL overall has been very entertaining to watch. Yeah, sure, there's some things I said I don't like, and I still stand by them. You know, I don't like the idea of hearing, you know, coaches do play calls over television. I already assessed why I don't like that. You know, the cheating thing that's still going on with the Houston Astros and all the steroid use and all the other stuff and the thing that happened with the, you know, New England Patriots and, you know, supposedly taping practices. We're just kind of giving an open leeway. But there are a lot of other things I like. I like the kickoff. I like the extra point. I like the 1 foot inbound rule. I like the idea of the hits. I mean, some of those hits, if you've watched the XFL at all, you would know that some of those are definitely penalties in the NFL. They're letting these guys go. And maybe it is a second opportunity. I personally prefer to build it as professional football because that's what it is. They're being paid as professionals. They're playing at the professional level. Why not? And I really think that there's just some things that we need to give some time to. The attendance has already increased, right? Was it by 20,000 for Seattle alone? We've had the ratings number increase already from the first game that was on last week to the first game that was on this week, this past weekend. So I just really start to think that, you know, some traction is going to be gained. People are starting to watch this and kind of see it for what it is. And, you know, the XFL is kind of once again making some of those groundbreaking strides, things that I think that we're going to start seeing in the NFL. I mean, they were already doing it before the XFL season even started, right? The XFL, they were showing you camera angles, right, from the quarterback's perspective. And so what did Fox do for the NFL? Oh, man, we better hurry up and jump on that. And so they did that for a couple of games, right? So the bottom line is, whether you like it or not, the XFL continues to make strides. And Vince McMahon is a visionary. If he wasn't, then the back then WWF and the Attitude Era wouldn't have been what it was. He had to completely rearrange everything because of what WCW was doing with the NWO and their whole kind of beginning of the Attitude Era, right? And Vince McMahon had to change things up, and that's what he's doing right now. And he's made it more football, but he's also made it exciting. And he didn't change elements this time in football that made it seem like it wasn't. And we're not anticipating WWE stuff, and he's not doing all the craziness before. And, you know, you live and you learn. You make mistakes. You learn from those mistakes. You go and build on what worked for you, and then you make things work. I think, obviously, Oliver Luck being in this league has made a tremendous difference for the XFL. But the point is, wouldn't that be something? Wouldn't it be something that at the XFL champion, their roster, their coaches, their team, then went to the NFL, and the worst team in the NFL would then go to the XFL? Hi, Bengals. What's up, Browns, right? I mean, come on. Because there's a lot of people that don't even believe some of these NFL teams deserve to have one because they've been so bad for so long. How bad have the Browns been for so long? If that was a rule, they'd have been in the XFL 20 years ago, and they'd have been there for a very long time, probably, to a lot of people. I mean, how many times have we asked the question if the current college football champion could take on the worst team in the NFL and win that game? That has been something that's been going on since I can remember, back in the 90s, right? There was the question about whether or not the Nebraska Cornhuskers could take on the Detroit Lions and win a game. I mean, that question's been going on for years, man. So maybe that would kind of answer that question a little bit. All the guys who didn't go to the NFL, didn't get drafted, they go to the XFL, right? Maybe we answer that question. But anyway, cool idea. I love NFL memes. And I just thought it'd be some kind of lighthearted to talk about. We got all this stuff going on with lobbyists and Houston Astros thing, and people seemingly couldn't even enjoy the friggin' All-Star weekend for basketball, which I thought was a real treat and a true gem for all of us. So, guys, I am Drew Duncan, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram is all at Drew Duncan Radio. You can find me on YouTube and Patreon, Drew Duncan Radio. And do not forget that I am wherever you are listening to the podcast. So take a device to play Drew Duncan on iHeart, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Deezer, CastBox, Podcast Addict. I am wherever you are listening to podcasts. And as always, don't you dare touch that dial.